Week 12. Can't believe we're entering Thanksgiving scenarios from a waiver wire perspective here.
Almost playoff time.
Wild. The season has just went by incredibly fast. So we'll get to the waiver wire list. It's important to note that there are 6 teams on bye this week and then 6 teams on bye week 14. If it sounds chaotic, if it sounds like a headache, it is. NFL, I hate you. Why did you have to do this to us? We're going to try to dissect it from a fantasy perspective and how to really navigate your options over the next 3 weeks. If you are 500, a little bit over, or in contention, we'll get to all those scenarios here. Let's hit the music. Again, welcome everyone to the Tuesday 19th edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Joe Bartel. You can follow me at JB Fantasy Sports on Twitter alongside me every week except for in 2 weeks here. Jake Letarski at RotoJake. We're diving into the Week 12 waiver wire pickups. I'm going to tell you right now, this will probably be a user-heavy podcast. If you're listening on any of the platforms you listen to podcasts, we're probably going to be talking about some questions that are posed by the chat as well. If you are in the chat watching this right now, awesome. We're likely going to be pivoting towards your questions because, unfortunately, despite 6 teams on bye, I think the waiver wire period is possibly as bleak as it's ever been. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah. It's probably one of our bleaker ones all year here. I mean, there are a couple running backs that I've liked more than the last couple of weeks. And, of course, we do have some deep dive segments. I've got notes on like an obscene amount of guys because with all these players on bye weeks, we're going to have to make some questionable starts here. Like you're going to pick up and start Deshaun Vele in a league. You know, there's going to be, just to throw out an example of the last guy I wrote about here before we came on. But, it's going to be an interesting week here, and it is all important. These backloaded bye weeks make the playoff crunch serious, and they also make for some very unique scenarios here.
I went through my 15 leagues that I'm playing in this week, and typically there's priority ads, whatever else. Like Audric Estime, I know he was disappointing, but you would search for that name first, and then go ahead and add him. I couldn't really think of a name that popped up as one of those I want to have. We'll get to the first person on your list. That probably applies to that for the most part. But I think the takeaway for me was, of those 15 leagues, I maybe registered like 4 automatic. I'm going to pick up these guys, or I need to do this. It is bleak. I mean, it truly is among the options out there.
That's the moral of the story. There's nobody automatic this week, but I guess I'm just going to jump into my list anyway.
Go for it.
My number one ad is a running back, and it is very contingent on a few different things happening here. And I picked him as my number one ad because of a universal availability, essentially here. And I'm picking Amir Abdullah of the Raiders here. Alexander Madison had an ankle injury. Zamir White had a quad injury. So this is kind of a last man standing situation here. Yes, they have Dylan Laub, who hasn't, a rookie 6th-round pick that hasn't really been active for the entirety of the season, and maybe they use him as an early down back here if both of those guys end up missing time. But Amir Abdullah is the clear pass catching back. He'll get some early down work. We saw that earlier in the season when some of these players were injured, and at 0% rostered, I think he has to be one of the top names you look at with just how tough it is to find running backs in this stage in the game. So someone that you can pick up and start this week during Mageddon is absolutely going to be my number one target
against
here.
the Broncos as well too. You figure the Raiders are going to be trailing plenty, and therefore Abdullah becomes the pass catching running back in the case Madison or Zamir White's running.
Exactly, with how good the Broncos have been playing, even on offense now these days, they're going to stuff the between the tackle carries. So let Laub get those stuffed carries, and then on 3rd and 9, 3rd and 10, 3rd and 11, let Abdullah get the screens. And now we don't know for sure if it'll be Gardner Minshew, or maybe they'll go try Desmond Ridder out. I know they've been wishy-washy.
That's been mentioned.
But if you can grab a running back that's going to get 60-70% of his team snaps, that's better than having to go and start, Algier, which I've been doing reluctantly, even guys like Corum who are getting more snaps, guys, these handcuff players that you're holding on your roster. Go out and get a guy that's going to play at least and really just hope for the best here. So that's my number one ad, is Amir Abdullah. My number 2 is basically like 2 A, B, C, and D. Okay. Right? And the theme of that is going to be retread wide receivers here. Guys we've talked about this season who can help your team but aren't but aren't necessarily, priority must-start guys. But the last couple weeks here, we've seen Quentin Johnston. He's 41% rostered. He's probably the less available of the one, but probably the one I'd have the most because, honestly, I don't know how many, as the Chargers beat writer, I don't know how many times you sat through a whole Chargers game. Not a lot of national TV attention here, but watching Herbert against the Bengals, he doesn't look injured. He looks good. He looks evasive, and he can throw on the run. He's looking like every bit of the Herbert that I drafted in dynasty leagues, ready to go long term, and taking the discount despite the lack of wide receivers. Well, maybe he has one in Quentin Johnston, and I'm pretty excited about that. He's there on the field. He's getting the red zone targets. There's a little bit of volatility with big play stuff, but that's that with Quentin Johnston. And speaking of big play volatility, Marquez Valdes-Scantling. He was our cover boy last week. He's only 25% rostered. Derek Carr, they're rolling him out. They're giving him just enough to make him look somewhat capable, as opposed to under the Dennis Allen regime earlier in the year. And that seems to be yielding results for the Saints, and that seems to be getting Valdes-Scantling big plays. And all you need is one big play, and suddenly you've hit your value in fantasy that day. And he's only 25% rostered. That's a boomer bust option, probably for non-PPR. If you look at, we'll call him 2C here, this is a more consistent option. I'm looking at Demario Douglas or Pop Douglas of the New England Patriots. Only 28% rostered. This man just gets consistent volume. He's kind of your PPR guy. Even though Kendrick Bourne is back, Douglas led the team in targets with 7 and was second in snap share. And honestly, most of it came in the first half too. So I thought he was on his way to a much bigger game, kind of slowed down in the second half. But he is the guy to own in New England at the wide receiver position, and you're looking at a pretty safe 9-10 PPR points every week, which when you're sitting there looking at the Falcons, the Bills, the Bengals, the Jags, the Saints, and the Jets all on bye, that's a lot of receivers out down, and you're going to have to make a decision to to field the lineup here. The other one I wanted to mention, Elijah Moore, he's back. He's only 8% rostered. I was pretty skeptical on Elijah Moore, but 12, 9, and 8 targets. You can't ignore that at this point. So he's someone that is at least getting volume. The only downside with Elijah Moore is he's got one of the more brutal rest of season schedules, and that's kind of why I put him down at 2D in the rankings here. His next 3 games are Pittsburgh twice and the Broncos, so that gives you something. That's going to make it very, very hard for him to produce here. But anyway, just to recap, Quentin Johnston, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, Demario Douglas, Elijah Moore, all under 41% rostered. Some of them a little more widely available. Those are going to be receivers that you're going to see a lot of teams, a lot of fantasy managers having to start this week. And then at number 5, I threw in Roschon Johnson here. He's only 8% rostered. Normally, I would have chalked up his performance as just kind of a fluky game, if you will, because he's been hit or miss all season. Very touchdown dependent option, non PPR guy. However, there is a new offensive coordinator, right? Shane Waldron is fired. It's certainly possible that the new regime wants to use him a little bit more, wants to save DeAndre Swift a little bit, wants to use Roschon Johnson as the goal line back. So just for comparison, Swift had a 54% snap count, 14 carries, 13 routes. Roschon Johnson, on the other hand, 44% snap count, 10 carries, 11 routes. It's the closest it's been all year, really. So Roschon Johnson at 8% is a very interesting option. Now, his rest of season schedule, not looking great either. He's against the Vikings, who are number 2 against running backs in half PPR formats. He's at the Lions, who are number 4. That's a little fluky because teams just kind of have to give up on the run against the Lions because they score so many points. So, keep some context in that stat. And then he's at San Francisco, who's middle of the pack. So not a great upcoming schedule, but if he's getting the goal line looks on an offense that can move the ball a little bit, then he's my number 5 pick here. And I just wanted to throw out there, Jonnu Smith and Taysom Hill both would have made my list. They're just above our threshold at 54%. So had to leave those guys out. Tight end eligible. Both are going to be started at tight end this week. That's for sure.
You and I obviously watched the Bears-Packers game. I felt like it was a very scheme-dependent game for Roschon Johnson, where the Bears identified a weakness running up the middle or running between the tackles.
Sure. And
that's where Roschon Johnson benefits more than DeAndre Swift. I'm not overreacting to that, but that is a good point, right? New offensive coordinator, maybe there's a scheme change or philosophy change where Roschon Johnson gets a bit more playing time. Yeah. Like of the Trey Bensons, Blake Corums, Cam Akers, would you have Roschon over any of them, the backups that still play a little bit?
It depends. Like, if you have to make a start this week, which is kind of what this show's all, that's going to be the theme of the show with all those teams on bye. Benson has 9 touches in back-to-back weeks leading up to his bye and is only 20% rostered. So I knew that, and I still didn't rank him over Johnston. Maybe it's just the novelty of Johnson and the because his
a new
situation
name out there.
changed. Yeah, his situation changed, and Benson's didn't, which is probably enough to get him, up on the list. Because James Conner is still definitely the lead back. You're not going to see Trey Benson get 44% of snaps and double-digit routes and carries. I just don't think that's going to happen.
Probably not as nearly as many red zone carries too. That was even before
100%.
Shane Waldron. They were using Roschon Johnson to an extreme extent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I guess I'd make a slight lead for Roschon Johnson in the short term. I think the long-term play is still Benson if you don't have to start any of these guys this week, because Connor has rarely made it through a full season healthy. And I know we're narrowing down on the end here, but he's had a lot of volume this year. So the long-term play is still probably Benson. But if you're looking for this week, and I guess that's why I made the decision, Roschon Johnson. Corum's interesting too, because I think he had 5 carries and more higher snap share than he has really all year, but he's still below those guys in my book right now.
In the league that we had Chris Godwin and Rashee Rice that we share together, we have Quentin Johnston, we have Demario Douglas, we have Elijah Moore. Of the 4 receivers that had lettered tier that you had mentioned, the only one we didn't have was Marquez Valdes-Scantling, and we tried to get him at least from an auction waiver perspective. It's the NFFC, it's a little bit deeper, but just goes to show that I think that's the issue. I'm going to do something that I've never done before on this show. We've been doing it now 5+ years. Jake, you and I, every Tuesday, going over waiver wire pickups. I don't think there's a single person that I want to add or recommend this week. Quentin Johnston and Demario Douglas, if you must play them, totally fine, makes sense. The touchdowns, I think Quentin Johnston, there's 5 or 6. At least 4 of them are completely fluky plays, completely blown coverages. Marquez Valdes-Scantling's touchdown last week, and even one of them the week before, were completely blown touchdowns as well too. It's like you're trying to guess what defense could be completely incapable of covering a player like Westbrook Akine, who I know you benefited from in the stake league a couple weeks ago. Is a player going to score a 98-yard touchdown? I don't know. I don't feel comfortable telling you, the listeners, bet on this guy to get a random touchdown. Instead, what I want to do is more highlight, I think, the roster conundrums that you might be having. So
I like this. Let's go through a little strategy, because it's all about mindset and context here. And just before we do that, Demario Douglas is the only one that doesn't fit that description that gets his points on actual volume here. So if you want to play it safe, that's your man. But anyway, let's continue to do your scenarios here.
So we have 6 teams on bye week 12. We have 6 teams on bye week 14. So I think the answer among the top 5 waiver wire pickups for me, or if we do Alan Sosowski's YouTube, Twitter, we must pick up these 10 players now. The answer is not who you're picking up today, Tuesday, but who are you picking up the day after all the cuts and transactions happen, whether it be Wednesday in your format, Thursday for a lot of the leagues that we do, possibly even Friday. This is the list that I'm going off of. These are the guys that I'm looking to see if they got dropped with all the bye weeks. Is Trey Benson, Blake Corum, Gus Edwards, Zach Charbonnet, Alec Pierce, Jalen Coker, or Mike Williams cut? If any of those 8 guys are cut after waivers occur Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, whatever it is, I'm picking up every single one of those players over anyone but Quentin Johnston, Demario Douglas among the recommended players. So that's above Amir Abdullah, who I like. I think the rationale makes sense. And in deeper formats, I'm all about that. But I'm looking at all 8 of those guys in situational aspects for the rest of the season. Is there any that you kind of push back on?
Yeah, well, so we're looking at this obviously a little bit differently. My context is I'm desperate. I need to start somebody this week. I'm trying to field a full lineup. Your context is you're one of those smart people who didn't stack up all your bye weeks in one week. And
I don't. I mean, it's hard because there's 6 teams on bye.
Oh yeah, 100%.
You could have done the best you could to avoid it. And I think the NFL, being stupid as it is to schedule this way, puts you in a bad spot. That's not a you thing as a fantasy.
I actually tried. There were actually a couple leagues where I made a conscious decision to get. I'm just gonna take an L week 12 with everybody on bye. With my Bengals stacks especially. I've got so many Bengals this year, and at least that's working out offensively. And then I'll worry about it then. And fortunately, I'm well above 500 in most of these leagues that it's not going to be an issue. There are a couple of 9-2 leagues. Some good stuff there. But anyway, back to your original question. Trey Benson does interest me as a long-term play. If you're fortunate enough to be able to make long-term plays, sure, go after Trey Benson. I have no problems with that. If you're a Kenneth Walker owner, you should absolutely have Charbonnet.
I think regardless,
100%.
You should have Zach Charbonnet in the same vein as you would Trey Benson, Blake Corum, anyone else like that.
Yeah, Gus Edwards also makes another one because, similar to the Trey Benson, James Conner situation, it's not like who am I thinking of? The Chargers running back. I just completely blanked.
J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards.
Yes. It's not like he's and Gus Edwards. It's not like Dobbins has had a fully healthy season in the past year. So Edwards is interesting. I like Alec Pierce less with Richardson at quarterback.
Still got 74 yards.
Yep.
This past Sunday.
Exactly. Mike Williams, I am a little bit interested in.
Okay.
So yeah, those guys are interested, but like, I'm not sure I'm going above Johnston or Douglas on any of those in particular.
Jalen Coker is the only one that it's tough because from the Panthers' perspective, they were on bye. He's probably widely available everywhere. It's worth a mention, especially if you are in deeper leagues. But I would assume
the reason I say no on that is Adam Thielen's coming back this week, and he's only 20% rostered. I actually thought about putting him on my list, but then it's Bryce Young is the quarterback.
I don't know if the Panthers
offense
really have a lot of benefit to making Thielen a thing. Now, they might just want to have Bryce Young be successful and win games. But like if you're the Panthers, your season might look a bit more successful if the undrafted free agent from Holy Cross becomes a guy you want on your 53-man roster this next upcoming year, as opposed to the ancient decrepit Adam Thielen, who hasn't done anything all season. Not that should matter, but NFL teams have done dumb things all of this year, and I'm just tracking it. It's just something mindful for Jalen Coker and Adam Thielen. Again, I would rather pick up Trey Benson, Blake Corum, Gus Edwards, Zach Charbonnet, Alec Pierce, Jalen Coker, Mike Williams, when waivers occur. And I would be willing to bet, Jake, that in your 12-team leagues, even in your 10-team leagues, some of these guys will be available with all the teams on bye.
I'd argue that there's going to be better players than that available. Most definitely will.
Sure. And
because
then
people are going to have to make tough decisions that aren't in the playoffs yet and can't afford to punt a week. It's just the reality of the situation.
So that was my next. I have a separate list. We talked about MVS. The Saints are on bye. Like he's one of those that if he's cut, I'm watching. What if Mike Gesicki or Keon Coleman or Ray Davis or your guy Tyler Algier are cut? People might have to make those decisions. I'm picking up those players too. So there's a list of at least 12 guys, and I just searched by the RotoWire depth chart, number 2 at running back, number 3 or 4 at receiver, and went down a list of possible people that might be considered. Because we've done the show now a number of weeks. We know more or less who's on the fringes. There's a dozen plus players who I think after the transaction report occurs this week, whatever week it is, that you're going to be considering instead of the guys we're recommending now.
I'm looking over my roster. Like I might cut Kyle Pitts this week.
I actually thought about including him.
That is one of it's a realistic thing that could happen. Now, part of it is I want to make him somebody else's problem.
Would you rather have Will Dissly over Kyle Pitts? I mean, you could play out that scenario too with how good
that's what I'm looking at here. If Jonnu Smith is available, I'm cutting Pitts for Jonnu Smith 100% and just riding him the rest of the year. So
it's just something I want people to think about because this is unprecedented for us, at least for me doing the show. There aren't guys I want to talk about picking up now, but who is going to be available later. Now, again, for the listening audience, JB Fantasy Sports at RotoJake on Twitter, either one of those options, we can help you sort through that when those transactions occur. We'd love to answer those questions if you see them, but that's a list of 12 different players, 13 different players that I would rather pick up than the guys that were rightfully on your top 5 list. Like it's reasonable to mention those. Yes. I want to take this one step further though. And
let's do it.
We have 6 teams on bye week 12, 6 teams on bye week 14. Let's be a little bit forward thinking. This waiver wire period isn't all that great. I just spent 5 minutes talking about guys I'd rather get after everyone's cut. Is there players, Jake, that you would want to trade away right now in week 12, knowing that you're going to have them for only 2 weeks and that their bye is in week 14? So I'm going to give you a name of a player, and I want you to say more or less yes or no. I would trade them to help my team now get to the playoffs or set myself up for success. Okay. So here's the first one. Would you trade away Mark Andrews for Tucker Kraft and a running back 2?
Yeah, definitely. Mostly because as I was just talking about what I was going to do to someone and sticking with Kyle Pitts, right? Of course, I paid a bunch of fab money for Mark Andrews after somebody cut him. Had a couple of okay weeks in there, but largely junk. I wouldn't feel bad about moving him if somebody was interested. I just don't think people will be that interested.
All right, so totally fine moving Mark Andrews. Tucker Kraft got 0 catches against the Bears. Just saying that's a tight end 12-ish that you would consider in a running back 2. Would you trade away Cortland Sutton? Again, Broncos on a bye week 14. Cortland Sutton been a mainstay for Bo Nix, and people in the chat were asking, is Bo Nix a streaming quarterback? Oh, absolutely, if he's already available.
Definitely.
Would you trade away Cortland Sutton for pieces that can help you over the next 2 weeks?
I mean, the answer is yes, but that's because Cortland Sutton is somebody that I actually tried to trade for last week.
Okay.
I think Sutton, with the way that Bo Nix is looking, is out of the list of names that we're going to talk about, he's possibly the most tradable asset on that list. And yes, you only get him 2 out of the next 3 weeks. I would make that trade for somebody that's already.
You would want
been
to
on their
acquire Cortland Sutton. You're not going to give him away.
No. I'm saying that this is the one. I mean, the answer is going to be yes to all of these, and then I'm going to provide some context, right, to throw that out there, because Cortland Sutton, I think you can actually get somebody of value back based on his last couple games, and maybe you get somebody that slips and doesn't look that his bye week's coming up. Cortland Sutton is somebody that I would trade. I mean, definitely, because I think out of all these names, I can make a ding on almost all these names on the list here, but Cortland Sutton is actually hot and somebody that you could, in theory, sell high on.
So here's a curveball in the chat. Again, talk about teams on week 14 bye. There are 6 teams on bye week 12, 0 week 13, another 6 teams on bye week 14, including the Ravens. You're not trading away Derrick Henry, but would you trade away Lamar Jackson, and in this case, Jackson Smith-Njigba, for Justin Jefferson?
Yes.
Which side do you like more, JSN Lamar or Jefferson?
I'm taking Jefferson. Okay. I want to capitalize on the JSN big games. Lamar getting the
he's got the bye week 14.
Week. Yep. Exactly. And
I would rather have JSN
because we'll get to this, but there are so many streaming quarterbacks here for this next couple weeks, and people are going to drop good quarterbacks this week as well. So so definitely I'd make that move.
All right. Again, Texans on the bye week 14. Would you trade away? You're not trading away Nico Collins. You're not trading away Joe Mixon, I don't think. CJ Stroud's super tradable as is. I would be happy to move him if somebody was interested. Mm-hmm. Would you trade Tank Dell, again, knowing that a person would effectively only have 2 weeks to be able to use them from a fantasy perspective this week in week 13?
Yeah, 100%. I'd be eager to move Tank Dell if I had any listeners, even low ball offers, just because Nico Collins coming back. And again, and the bye week obviously factors into play, but I think Collins coming back is almost a bigger factor for me than the bye week. If you can somehow sell somebody on Nico Collins, go ahead and do it.
On
Tank Dell, go ahead and do that. Yeah.
I think the same thought process would apply for Ramondre Stevenson, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Patriots in a bye week 14. I think he's right up there too. These last two, and again, I'm trying to list people for week 14 buys to help you who might have these players capitalize, knowing that you're going to be able to move them probably for lesser pieces, but understand it's a 2-week scenario, maybe playoffs, where these guys could benefit you that are likely in your mainstay starting lineup section. So we talked about Mark Andrews, Cortland Sutton, Tank Dell, Ramondre Stevenson. Would you, Badgers alumni, Jake Letarski, trade away Jonathan Taylor from the Colts, knowing that the Colts are on bye week 14?
If it's a move that you can sell, I think you have to. You're gonna need to get something pretty solid in return here. But Jonathan Taylor has the Lions coming up, and then the Patriots, which is actually a very good matchup. Then week 14 bye. His playoff schedule, all middle of the pack kind of teams. I mean, the answer is always yes. I would move him, but he's the one that obviously out of this whole thing would require something pretty meaningful in return.
Okay. And then the last one, and I think people are going to balk at this, but I actually be very, very comfortable trading this player away for a 2-for-1 deal if I could. Jaden Daniels, Commanders, also have a week 14 bye. So it's Patriots, Colts, Ravens, Commanders among fantasy relevant teams. Would you trade away Jaden Daniels, who's had a top 5, top 7 fantasy season?
100%. I'd move him now while you can. I think the rookie wall's sort of here. Now, granted, he had a couple tough matchups against the Eagles and the Steelers here, and he didn't have such a great game against the Panthers. I'm just looking at his game log. But I think we're starting to see maybe a lot more film come out on him. Teams are starting to figure it out a little bit. Granted, he'll eventually evolve and take the next step. I love his long-term outlook. But if I could get somebody, if I could sell somebody on Jaden Daniels right now, I'd absolutely move him here because.
So if you could get like a Herbert and Najee Harris.
That's a great hypothetical. I'm really bad at coming up with hypothetical trades, but that's a really good one, Joe. And again, the Eagles, who limited so much last week, Jaden Daniels has them in the championship semifinals too. So there's a good chance you got the Daniels bye, and if you're making a theoretical title run, you're also going to sit him in week 16.
Yes. I don't even look at the playoff or postseason schedule for fantasy yet, but I know a lot of.
I try not to let it affect me too
right.
much, but when I dial in on a specific situation like this, that's when I kind of start to look at it as a tiebreaker type deal.
6 teams on bye this week and 6 teams on bye week 14. Scott in the chat asks, "Do you have a top 3 guys to go after?" My answer to this, and again, unprecedented, is my top 3 guys are who are going to be cut after the 6 teams on bye this week, and people reacting to that, whether it be Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. You did list Amir Abdullah for the Raiders, given that Zamir White is banged up, given that Alexander's banged up, Alexander Massen's banged up. Quentin Johnston, Demario Douglas, Elijah Moore, MVS, 4 different tiers of receivers.
Yeah, I did a top 6. I cheated a little bit because there were 4 receivers that were basically in a similar outlook.
Yeah. All right. So let's take a break with Blue Wire here, and then we'll come back with the streaming quarterback section. There's a lot of questions in the chat kind of pertaining to that, and I think it's worth reiterating the names and the rankings for the guys likely available. Stick around. All right, we're back, and again, talking streaming quarterback section. Reminder to folks that multiple teams, Falcons, so Kirk Cousins, certainly Josh Allen, your guy Joe Burrow, maybe Derek Carr, maybe Aaron Rodgers. I don't think Trevor Lawrence or Mac Jones, but 6 teams on bye for week 12. So we have Anthony Richardson, who was our cover boy last week, still technically under our threshold, actually looked fantastic in his return to the lineup.
Yeah. He was 20 for 30, a passing touchdown, which is very encouraging. And then, of course, 10 rushes for 32 yards, 2 touchdowns rushing. It's a pretty, it looks pretty good for him coming up. I mean, he's versus Detroit, which has a good shootout potential. He's at New England, that is pretty much dreadful against the run. Then after that, it's a bye week and at Denver. So I don't necessarily love what we're looking at here. I also not quite sure I'm buying the fact that Richardson has suddenly figured it out as a passer, which I don't see it. I have a tough time. I need eye bleach from what I watched from him on tape earlier in the season here. So I'm pumping the brakes on this one a little bit here. If anything, if you held on to him, I'd try to include him as a trade chip. Be like, hey, he's back now. You might start him some of these weeks. And do that. Otherwise, I'm not super aggressive to go out and get him because Richardson was down here, and then he has a little spike, right? What's reality for the rest of the season? Yeah. Whereas somebody like Bo Nix has been sliding all the way up like this, all year long. He just had his second best game of the season after the Panthers, of course. And the thing is, he's doing it with his arm. He threw 4 touchdown passes. Bo Nix is. The selling point on him when we were mentioning him in earlier shows was the fact that he can scramble, he can run, he's a tough runner, tough to bring down, gets rushing touchdowns here. But to see him do it with his arm like that shows some real growth and makes me very interested in him. His upcoming schedules at the Raiders, they're terrible, versus Cleveland, they're terrible. Then of course we have a bye week. Yeah. And then he's against the Colts, terrible against the pass. Chargers, middle of the pack. Bengals in the championship game, which is a glorious matchup. If he gets
you wouldn't play him against the Chargers in that playoff scenario. But
no,
my whole contention is people are getting excited about Bo Nix's rookie of the year. I want to see him play against real teams. Like the Falcons are not a real team. The Ravens defense not a real team. Certainly the Panthers, Saints are. But they're not actually playing a real team the rest of the season. The Raiders are a joke. The Browns are even worse. The Colts are somewhere in between joke and kind of competent. Chargers are good. But, I agree. We're not going to get the answer. I don't want to make the mistake where we overreact and be like, oh, Tua is a top 10 quarterback when the Dolphins played 17 0-10 teams in that time when Tua was really good. And then when Tua plays anyone good, he looks awful. Sure. That's what I feel like Bo Nix is. But from a fantasy perspective, we're not getting that the rest of the season. So it's certainly something to keep track of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right on here. So those are the standalone options we have to discuss, just because especially we have Richardson on the cover. Then you look at other streamers. Russell Wilson.
Can I pause you? Sorry, real quick, ahead. Jake. Justin Herbert, I've seen in the chat a few times mentioned in the same vein as Bo Nix. Again, we said that Bo Nix's schedule is great rest of season. Herbert is in the middle of a really good stretch from a fantasy perspective, but I think Herbert has looked better, and I'm more confident that he is that guy than Bo Nix.
Don't you dare drop Herbert or for any of these guys. Okay. Herbert is a tier. I didn't even include him on the conversation because he's like 80% rostered right now. I mean, he's been solid. Yep. Mm-hmm. And Herbert plays the Ravens this week, who are the third worst against the pass, and then the Falcons the week after, and then the Chiefs, who have been all right. And then Tampa Bay. Now, week 16 against the Broncos, maybe you think about streaming somebody else in the championship game if you're there. But for the next three out of the next 4 weeks are elite fantasy matchups. Like, I have a Burrow-Herbert league where I will probably start Herbert in a handful of those weeks. So it just Herbert is solid. I love him the rest of the season. If anything, try to get it, because a lot of people early in the season drafted him as a backup and have two quarterbacks. I would try to make it seem like, oh, just toss in Herbert as a trade piece, but be nonchalant about it, that you're not actually that interested
you don't want
in
to know.
Herbert.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you can just give me your backup quarterback too in this trade that we're making, right? And then throw him on there. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I love Herbert rest of the season. Like I said, passed every bit of the eye test. He looks healthy. He's evasive. He can throw on the run. I was so crazy impressed with him on Sunday Night Football here, and I'm ready to. It's not as if I wasn't already all in. I've got plenty of shares of Herbert, but I'm gonna, if the trade deadline hasn't passed, I'm gonna try to see if I can throw him in.
I'm gonna preface this next question for you to help the deep streaming quarterback options. Let's take Drake May out of the equation. Technically, Drake May is widely available. They play the Dolphins. I think the answer would be, I'm playing Drake May every single time over these other guys. So we're moving him from this. Yep. If your league has Jameis Winston against the Steelers, Will Levis against the Texans, Bryce Young against the Chiefs, or Cooper Rush against the Commanders, and you must start one of those four, who is the one that you're starting?
Can I say none and pick up Tommy DeVito?
Jesus, seriously?
Against he's at home against Tampa Bay.
Oh, I don't know if I would do
Look
that.
at how
that
terrible these matchups
balls.
are. The Steelers, you don't want anybody against the Steelers. They're punishing quarterbacks here. And is Cooper Rush really any better than Tommy DeVito once we get on this train? I don't want Will Levis. I don't really want Bryce Young. DeVito's at least got a good matchup, and maybe the team gets behind him. I don't know, man.
Oh God,
I'm throwing a huge bid on DeVito in Dynasty this week because I ran out of quarterbacks. But if we're talking about that tier quarterback,
he's so bad. I know the Giants beat our Packers last year, and that always makes me hate the scrubby quarterback more when the Packers defense is that way. But he was not good in that game. And I just think about seeing his agent and his dad in the stands, and we're like, oh, DeVito's so great. It's like, no, he didn't do anything on the actual football field.
All right, fine.
He's a top 20 streaming candidate.
Okay, yeah, fine. No, I don't know about top 20. Fine. All right. Well, let's say you convinced me there. I guess I go Jameis on Thursday Night Football, but I hate it. I'm sick about it. You get him on a short week, he's going to get trounced, and you just hope that he gets a couple garbage time touchdowns while he's attempting to dig the Browns out of the hole at the end of the game. That is the Jameis Winston fantasy value. So yeah, sure. I guess start him in a way worse matchup. And also, now that I think about it, the Bucs are they're coming off a bye week too, even though they're on the road. Yeah,
I don't mind Cooper Rush against the Commanders. I guess that's where I was going with this, that I'm considering Cooper Rush over Winston in one of my leagues where that matters. I thought, 350 passing yards is one thing. The interception that he had was just a broken play, a penalty that should have been called. And I think Cooper Rush is a fine enough backup, but more importantly, Mike McCarthy at least trusts him enough to pass often. That defense isn't very good. They're going to be trailing against the Commanders.
They threw 40 times last night,
50, right?
Before, I remember it was like they threw before the fourth quarter even started. He was close to 40 pass attempts. Right. So I was just like, wow, okay, so much for running the ball. That that's toast, over and done with.
That's where I go back to where I just think it kind of matters a little bit that maybe Cooper Rush is the play over Winston, who I agree with you. Thursday Night Football against the Steelers, AFC North game. That is the last scenario in which I want to play Jameis Winston, and yet he's backing up Kirk Cousins to few my leagues. Might have to. That's kind of what it's looking like right now. Mm-hmm. So DeVito, Cooper Rush, Jameis Winston, a real legitimate fantasy question that I imagine a lot of people either listening to the show or will be debating on their fantasy lineups come Thursday night. I hate fantasy football. That's kind of where I'm at. Where I have to decide that. Let's transition to the running backs, Jake. But real quick before we do so, word from our sponsor, Circa. The end of the season, of course, is getting closer. Catch the big game poolside at Stadium Swim at Circa Resort and Casino in Las Vegas. 6 temperature-controlled pools, a massive 143-foot screen, and booming game sound. Plus, view the pyrotechnics and visual effects throughout the game. Grab the best seat in the sun with day beds, poolside boxes, cabanas, and more. Stadium Swim's big game viewing party is February 9th at Circa Resort and Casino. Space is going fast. Reserve your spot today at Circa Las Vegas.com. All right, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on the running backs because we did a lot of talking about other scenarios with the week 12 and week 14 buys.
Exactly.
Again, let's run through who are our options for this week.
Yeah, so I started with Abdullah. He was number 1 on my pickup list just because he's 0% rostered. Madison has an ankle injury. Zamir White has a quad injury. You have to see what's going on with the practice for this week. So because Abdullah could not even be a top 10 pickup at the end of the week, but we threw him on here because his circumstances actually changed. Also making my list was Roshan Johnson. Normally I'd write this off as a fluke, but he was the preferred goal line back with the new offensive coordinator here. Remember, the Bears made a change this past week and let Shane Waldron go. He was really close to DeAndre Swift in both snap count, carries, and routes run. A little bit of a tough upcoming schedule, but that's someone you wanted to look. From there, odds and ends, guys that really didn't make my list, but we're going to take a look at anyway. Javonte Williams, check to see if he was dropped. I know in the estimate craze last week, a lot of people maybe decided it was time to cut bait with him.
Yep.
He was the new back again, so I'd take a look at him. 58% rostered, but Jonathan Brooks of the Panthers is set for a return this week. It's an absolute wild card. You don't know what you're going to get, but sure, go ahead and grab somebody. I'm not sure I trust starting him this week, but in any case, that's a player that there's some theoretical upside that might make your team a little bit better. Cam Akers got on my radar too. He's only 17% rostered. He had 10 carries plus 12 routes and 2 targets, and compare that to Aaron Jones, who had 15 carries, 10 routes, and 1 target. So Akers is looking like somehow the preferred passing back, because of course he caught a receiving touchdown here. He's cutting into the Aaron Jones workload significantly enough to get him on the fantasy radar. We talked a lot about Trey Benson earlier in the show, 22% rostered.
Yep.
Might have been dropped during his bye, but he was picking up steam beforehand. I think I wrote he had 9 touches in back-to-back games. That puts him up near the top of the handcuff list if that's your strategy here going forward. And you almost definitely want to have him if you're a James Conner owner. And then I had a note about Marshawn Lloyd, who we talked about last week from the Packers. He was activated from IR, but now it looks like he's going back due to an emergency appendectomy. So who knows what the heck's going on there?
I don't think he's going to, real quick, I don't think he's going back on IR because then he'd be effectively done for the season. He was activated off injured reserve, but they'll keep him out, I would assume, for the next 3 weeks.
Okay.
I had this exact thing a couple of years ago. I'm not an NFL player. I literally couldn't walk for the first week. So I would assume Marshawn Lloyd does not play until closer to Christmas. But the way that they would do the IR stuff,
yeah,
I don't think he goes back on
yeah,
IR.
Exactly. Yeah, no, there's a very specific thing there here. And, Gus Edwards is also, I believe, still underneath our threshold.
Oh, he's
here.
well underneath it, yeah. I think I want to say like 22.
Yeah, 27% rostered and 6 carries for 27 yards last week. Mm-hmm. Not a whole lot to write home about. The Ravens have a decent run defense there too, but he's in there. At least that makes me enough to cut Kamani Vidal.
Yep.
He's no longer in the handcuff conversation. I know he's somebody that we talked about as a long-term flyer, but we never expected Edwards to be back quite as quickly as he did. So that's really the book on running backs. I don't know if you had any other names or anyone else.
Only one I wouldn't quite give up on is Khalil Herbert again. Bengals on bye. He was traded to the Bengals. If there was a scenario in which Chase Brown got injured, Khalil Herbert does step in. He's a lower tier than Benson, Corum, and probably even Cam Akers for me. But I would have a hard time in deeper leagues cutting Khalil Herbert. I'd look for other options if that's
he's going to get cut all over the place this week.
I would agree. Right. Yeah. Which I go back to what I said. Unprecedented, but I would say my top waiver pickups are whatever happens Wednesday, Thursday, Friday after cutdowns for your leagues as people are trying to react to the 6 teams on bye. All right. We'll get another word from our sponsors here. We'll get our good friend Nick telling us about DK Pick 6.
We're proud to be brought to you by DraftKings Pick 6. So many NFL offerings each week over at Pick 6. Been enjoying playing on the Pick 6 platform each and every week of the NFL season. Think a certain quarterback will throw for more than 300 yards. How about your favorite receiver scoring a touchdown? Check out Pick 6, the newest way to play fantasy football and win cash right now with DraftKings. Here's how it works. Just pick 2 to 6 players of the same sport and choose if they'll have more or less of a given stat. Yards, catches, touchdowns, etc. Lock in those picks and compete against opponents for a shot at huge cash prizes. Download the new DraftKings Pick 6 app now and use our code ROTOPICK. That's ROTOPICK. Again, ROTOPICK, ROTOPICK. If you're a new Pick 6 customer, play $5, get $50 in Pick 6 credits guaranteed. Just use that code ROTOPICK. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-78-89-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
All right, Jake, we're back and talking receivers. You had mentioned at the top of the show a few of the more obvious names, whether it be Quentin Johnston, Demario Douglas, or Elijah Moore.
Yeah, it's Johnston and Douglas kind of in the tier of their own. Johnston, maybe your non-PPR, bigger play, hopeful guy. Douglas, your more stable PPR guy to do the target volume. MVS had another good week, but again, some of this stuff is fluky. Elijah Morris continues to get target volume, just has a terrible matchup this week. Throwing other names out there, Adam Thielen, 20%. He's expected back for week 12. We don't know how much he's going to get used. If someone got frustrated and cut Ricky Pearsall after he didn't get a pass this week, that could be worthwhile.
He's on that list too. You're right. That's a good call.
Mm-hmm. Mike Williams could come back around. And those are guys that I have that I could maybe be somewhat comfortable picking up, except for maybe Thielen, because, we'll see. But most of those guys I could pick up and start this week. If you want some deep swings, though, because, again, you're going to be deep leagues and there's 6 teams on bye, Devon Vele has 4 straight games with 3 or more targets and 25 or more snaps. He's basically the slot guy in 3 wide receiver sets for the Denver Broncos. He got a little uptick with garbage time last week, so there's some volume there here. Kendrick Bourne from the Patriots is an interesting case. He went from 0 snaps to a 48% snap share and a 5 catches, 5 targets, 70 yards, and a touchdown line.
Wild.
They keep mixing in Jalen Polk because they don't want to admit that the second-round pick might be a bust. But Kendrick Bourne is better if they want Drake May to develop and work with the best players possible. So, we'll see what direction they go there here. But big change from week to week here. He's on bye, so I don't know how much I like this. But Curtis Samuel of the Bills, he was number 2 to Khalil Shakir in snaps, routes, targets, and yards. And now he has back-to-back games with a 70% route share and 6 or more targets here. Of course, note that Keon Coleman was out with an injury.
And Dalton Kincaid. I think that matters a little bit too.
And Dalton Kincaid. But Amari Cooper was back at least, so it's not like they were full, it's not like they were in complete injury. But, follow the injury reports, see what happens. And then heading over to Atlanta, again, also on a bye. But if Mooney misses time with a hamstring injury, even though it's maybe not considered serious, Kadarius Hodge is kind of next up on that depth chart. Again, we're taking some big swings here. But, out of all those guys, maybe Bourne, maybe Vele are the only ones that I could see starting.
I would be surprised. I play 15 leagues, all of them pretty significantly deep. I would be surprised that anyone from that list, again, Devon Vele, Curtis Samuel, Kadarius Hodge, those are great names to mention at least. I think Kendrick Bourne is the only one I would see. Like, I've seen Noah Brown start a lot for the Commanders. There's a threshold of Noah Brown, and then there's a lot of people below that. I don't think Noah Brown's all that good. So, like, just for example, this is it would be pretty dire if you're considering the Devon Veles of the world, which is fair with 6 teams on bye. Something certainly to monitor. Real quick, we're going to go to the tight end. Something in the chat, Nicholas asked, I think is fair. For a 1-week start, would you rather play Jonnu Smith? Of course, you got nearly 30 fantasy points, or Will Dissly, who scored his first touchdown of the year, but 4 catches, 80 yards against the Bengals?
I think I go Jonnu because Dissly took advantage of a very, very good matchup, and Jonnu seems to be pass catching option number 2, and Dissly might not quite be in that conversation, right? So
I would say that
it's Jonnu for me.
In a 6-team bye scenario like we have here, week 12 and also week 14, both should be starting. Like if you have a scenario where Jonnu Smith is your starting tight end and one of your flexes is Will Dissly, I have zero issue with that. I think Will Dissly is better than a lot of the receivers we talked about. Would you rather play Will Dissly or Elijah Moore against the Steelers?
Dissly.
Yeah, that's where I go back to. And maybe Quentin Johnston you're playing over him. I think Mario Douglas you're playing over Dissly too.
Over him, yep.
But that's kind of what I want us to be aware of. Be unconventional for an unconventional week, and it might end up playing off because I guarantee you other people are dealing with the same problem. So at tight end, we talk about Jonnu Smith, Taysom Hill.
Yeah, the Saints are on bye.
The
Saints are on bye, but if someone does cut Taysom Hill after his huge week, you could go out and grab him because it's not like they're getting that much healthier.
Yep.
And they're going to still have to rely on Taysom Hill. And then as far as new names, I guess you got to look at Luke Schoonmaker for the Cowboys. Jake Ferguson was ruled out with a concussion on Monday Night Football, so it'll be a short week. And
needed 5 points from Jake Ferguson in the RotoWire Vegas league that we did on Sleeper. He got me 2.5 before I had already chalked up as a win. I'll be number 1 in our standings, if not for the first quarter concussion by Jake Ferguson. I played I've said this a lot now. I've played in a lot of different leagues. I have had that kind of dumb bad luck a lot, Jake, this year, and it's really pissing me off. So if you ever want to just make a lot of money, fade every decision or any prominent player I need to make, have a good game because it seems like it does not happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right on here. So
Right on.
so we're
Let me vent, Jake. It's fine.
Yeah, exactly. I know. I was starting to look ahead to streaming defenses in my head because I actually forgot to write some down here, but I got some for you now.
Okay. Well, I know the Lions, if you had them last week, I think they're still fine enough this week as well, too. We're doing that in the NFFC. Is there any other ones streaming defense?
Yeah, they're at the Colts. There are some that are actually very,
Even
very
better than
available. I mean, I'd pick up the Commanders at home against Cooper Rush and the Cowboys. We saw how that went this week. And it's not only that Cooper Rush is bad and they might be missing Ferguson. It's that team is starting to quit. You can see the signs. Mm-hmm. At the end, all the fans are out of there by the fourth quarter. They're fighting out on the field on multiple plays in a row after they're going to run up the score with Joe Mixon, which I love for reasons.
It was great for us, yes.
Yeah, exactly. But this is a team that's ready to bail on the season. The Cowboys are done. They're not. I mean, they need an absolute miracle to go back to the playoffs, and it ain't happening here without Dak. I'd go with the Commanders because they're at home. And, the implied total is pretty low. So Commanders against the Cowboys, under 30% on both ESPN and Yahoo. Also, I mentioned playing Tommy DeVito as a deep streaming option here. But if you want to go the other way,
pivot.
Tampa Bay is coming off a bye. I don't know if they're getting healthier. I want to check out that injury report a little bit. But they're coming off a bye, and they're heading to New York to play Tommy DeVito. I mean, even though Tampa Bay's defense has been terrible, you want to take a look at that here. Other than that,
Texans probably over that threshold given they played the Cowboys last week, but if they are somehow still available, they also deserve consideration too.
Yeah, they have a good matchup here as well. That's what I'm looking at. If you do need to stream someone, it would be one of those two. But I think most of the good streaming defenses are ready to go. I mean, the Chiefs are the best option this week at Carolina. Steelers, Texans are number 3. Jerry actually ranks the Commanders number 4. So and they're a readily available one. So it's not like this week, if any, you're holding 2 defenses. But if you've got a defense that's in a not so hot matchup, and maybe you want to consider something else, like I don't know, do you really play the Packers defense against the 49ers this week?
Nah, I agree.
You play the Eagles defense against the Rams, or do you play the
That's
Commanders
one we might
against
have
the
to
Cowboys?
do. Yeah, we might have to do the Eagles one. And there's
mostly
a baseline
I don't really
of production.
Want to cut the Eagles defense, but yeah.
There's a baseline of production from a sacks, and you figure they're holding most teams under 20 sometimes, at least they have been recently. I'm just going back to, I cannot believe that you might have talked me into playing Tommy DeVito as my starting quarterback in a must-win scenario. I hate you, NFL, for making us have to do this week 12. This is so frustrating. And I guarantee you, NFL, I'm talking to you right now, anyone decision makers, we're going to do this stupid damn thing week 14 as well. Do not ever put 6 teams on bye twice in a 3-week stretch ever again. If you want to cater to us, the fantasy audience, be smarter, be better. This is stupid.
It's incredibly frustrating. And you know what? As long as they keep doing this, though, I am just going to be mentally prepared to punt one of these weeks. Hopefully I can field the lineup. If
that
I
might
can't,
be the strategy we have to do.
Hey, man, if I'm 9-2 and can field the lineup, and can't field a line, like I'm gonna not field a full lineup before I cut somebody. I don't know if that's the most ethical fantasy thing to do with other people, trying to fight for playoff spots. But I certainly don't mind. There's a chance where you just might not make a hard cut and take an L.
I think that's exactly what. It's horrible.
That's where we're at. That's what we're getting forced to do.
Fantasy experts, like not that we have to have a moral high ground, but like. This is a totally fine scenario in my mind to do. I would never tell somebody that they should be punting it, but that's what you need to do if you're 9-2, and that's I'm very frustrated. I was frustrated at the beginning of the year when I saw this unfold, and to have it practically played out the way it has. And again, knowing the conversation we're having 2 weeks, week 14, same thing. It's really, really frustrating to me. You can't really do anything with week 13, the Thanksgiving games. A bye week there is fine, but I think we had one in week 9 where there was 0 teams on bye. Let's space this out. Let's do
Put 3
better.
Of those teams,
Let's do better on this. Or instead of one bye week having 2 teams, let's have it more of 4. It's a joke, and while it leaves good football for the most part, I think more or less on the slate, it is very frustrating from a fantasy perspective to have to deal with. So that does it for us. All my ranting, all my frustrations, calling the NFL stupid. No more here for the Week 12 show. Hopefully, best of luck to your lineups. If you have questions, and if you are trying to target players cut after the waiver wire period, at JB Fantasy Sports on Twitter, at RotoJake, Happy to help you guys out best we can. Thanks everyone for listening.